As I'm preparing this talk, Valentine's Day is fast approaching. Love is in the air, or perhaps it's not. Perhaps commercialism is in the air as people try to get you to buy their products to celebrate Valentine's Day. I've been thinking a lot about what love is. What does love mean? And when I think of love, I think of a parable from the Bible of the Prodigal Son. And you can read about it in Luke chapter 15. And if you've not read it before, you're not familiar with it, you might even want to pause the video right here and go and read it. It starts in verse 11 and then you can come back. It's a story about a son who leaves home, who leaves his father behind, and then he comes back and the father lovingly accepts him. Long story short, here's the slightly longer version. When I think of the prodigal son coming to the father and saying, "Give me my inheritance, I want to leave," I think of Veruca Salt from the film Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Do you remember her? "I want it now!" If I'm honest though, the prodigal son also reminds me of me. I love God, I follow God, I try to do what God says, but the truth is there are times where I lose focus of that, where I do my own things. When I come to God in prayer, and what I realise I'm saying to him is, I want it this way and I want it now. I might not be so obnoxious about it, you'll have to ask God about that. But perhaps my attitude is more about me than it is about him, and in a sense we're all prodigals. I'm going to use a series of images in this talk. This is the first one, and it's painted by Stephanie Frostad, and it's called The Claim. And I love the way that she's got the sun drawing this line in the sand, this line that says, "This far and no further. I don't want to be in your family anymore. I cut myself off from you." I find it quite emotional as I think about this breaking of relationship, of the devastation of the father, who's done all he can to raise his son, and then one day his son is effectively saying to the father, "I wish you were dead, I don't need you anymore, I just want my inheritance early." And the son clears off, he moves to a distant land, he goes it alone, but he has plenty of cash. He spends it, he has some fun, he thinks he's having the whale of a time, and I'm sure he felt that way in the moment. But to all the rest of us, it looks more like this picture, like he was just throwing his money away, or perhaps even burning his money, just frittering it. And we come to the next of Stephanie Frostad's paintings, the Chute. And I'm looking at this, and it so typifies what happens with the son who goes his own way, who spends all his money. And in the end, as he runs out of money, there's a famine in the land, and he ends up begging a farmer for a job, and the father sends him out to care for his pigs. And as you see the son walking through this narrow confine with the pigs, it just symbolises the track he was on, the path he had chosen, and this way that he's just restricted into. And it seems like there's no way out, but of course there is. We'll come to that in a minute. One of the devastating consequences for the son in this story is for a Jew who couldn't eat pork, to be caring for pigs must have been humiliating and devastating on all sorts of levels. But more than that, as a human being, the Bible says he looked at the pig food and he felt like it would be good to eat it. And there's probably not many of us listening to this talk who can imagine what that feels like, to be so starving, to be so hungry that he's looking at rubbish, throwing out food, slops, and thinking, "I'm hungry enough that I'd like to eat that." And we come to this point of absolute devastation, this point that we see in Frostad's next painting, Turning Point, of the son hunched up with these pigs. And I remember showing this picture to a friend of mine. She said to me, as she looked at it on a projection screen at the front of a church, she said to me, "Why are there 3 pigs in the picture? Where's the son?" And I found that really insightful, as she couldn't distinguish that in a sense the picture shows the complete fall of the son, the mess he's in, as he's reached this place of absolute dejection and brokenness, and it's almost like he's become one of the pigs. A few years ago I helped in a prayer space in a school, and one of the activities was a friendship activity. And in the activity, children and pupils did it in pairs, and they received this suitcase you can see on the screen, And in it there were lots of words on little bits of cardboard. And they had to choose 3 cards with 3 words that best described their friends. And it was a wonderful activity to supervise as they picked words like kind or reliable or whatever it was. And at the end of the activity, as the facilitator, I would say to the person who had heard these 3 positive words, how did that make you feel? The most common response was, I was shocked. These children, these young people, shocked to hear something positive about them. Any of you who are around schools will know that most schools, probably all schools, thrive on positivity and wanting to just put this positive message into children. And yet there's something in the makeup of our young people and our children, something in our society that has led to a real brokenness, a real sense of it's all gone wrong. And we see this in the life of the son. And Frostad has painted a series of 6 paintings that she's called Dwindle and Gain. And as we look at the pictures, we see the purse emptying slowly, bit by bit, until there's nothing left. A son who goes from full of hope and optimism and life, who ends up empty. And Frostad says, once empty, the purse becomes an empty vessel. And there's a sense of in our emptiness, we become open to what God has for us. Something more beautiful, something more meaningful than gold. Mercy, belonging, acceptance. And so the son has a moment of clarity. He comes to his senses and he decides to go home. He hatches a plan where he was going to go to his father and say, I'm just trying to survive. I sinned against heaven and against you. I'm not worthy to be called your son. Please just take me as a servant. Please I just need to survive. In absolute desperation and with nothing left, he trudges home. And we can't imagine how he felt and the sense of, as he comes to his father and says, can I just be a servant? The rejection that he would have expected in that moment. The looks of judgment, the looks of disapproval. And in contrast, the father sees him and he runs to meet him. The son who expected rejection instead receives grace. Must have been a strange day for the servants in that household, as they see this probably elderly, rich and regally dressed gentleman running out of the house. And I like to think, as someone who's perhaps, I'm middle-aged, I'm not old yet, right? And I can imagine him running and running and running. And as I think if I have ever run, and it's a rare occurrence, I might run for like 20 seconds and then, and you can imagine the father going, son, I'm in, son. He's running towards him and he's pausing for breath, and the servants are looking at him as just say, what is going on? We've never seen anything like this before. This almost comedic scene as the father runs to greet his son. And the son, with tears, you imagine, streaming down his eyes, his face, thinking, but don't you hate me? I've treated you so badly and I'm coming home in disgrace. And the father is running, sweeping him up in his arms and welcoming him. I love this picture, love that lifts a child, by Christy Valiant. And the way she's just captured the father's love for a child. This is what she says about her painting. What inspired me the most from this parable was the father's loving heart. The shadow represents the father's view that his son will always be his little child. Even when his son basically said, I wish you were dead and I had all your money, the father handed the money over without bitterness. In the culture of that day, the son would have been disinherited or even stoned. A father who loves his son that much had to have had high hopes for that boy. Did he pray for his baby son? Did he watch his son's heart grow harder through the years? Did his own heart mourn for those younger days? When the rebellious son finally took some steps back towards the father, did the father run to meet him and lift him in the air with such overflowing joy that he couldn't contain himself? And it's just such a beautiful picture that I do find very emotional as I look at it. And I find it interesting to contrast it with this more famous picture, Rembrandt's The Prodigal Son. I remember looking at this painting for the first time. I was on a retreat many years ago, about 20 years ago. And the other leaders in my church had sent me on this retreat because I was tired, I was exhausted, I was bent out. They'd sent me away. It wasn't a one-way ticket, but they wanted me to go and find some rest and restoration. And as I looked at this picture, I just wanted to cry and weep because I looked at this son in his brokenness. And I thought, you know, that's me, that's how I feel. I just feel like it's all gone wrong. And in my brokenness, in my imperfection, in my exhaustion, the Father loves me. But as I think of that son coming home in the state he's in, and he smells and he's dirty, and yet the Father flings his arms around him. And I find it helpful that the first picture makes sense of the other one for me. Because when you think of someone who perhaps smells a bit and has actually been offensive, because if you put yourself in the position of the Father, you spent all your life accumulating all this wealth, you've worked hard for it, and the son has gone and he's just literally frittered it away, it's gone. And now he's coming back empty-handed, this offensive, dirty, smelly son. And yet, as a loving parent, you can't help but hug them and welcome them home. Are you more like the father in this story? Or are you more like the older brother? As we look at this painting, we're reminded of the father saying, bring the best robe, put it on the son, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And then we're also reminded of the words of the son. And I like to think that the person, as you see the servant handing over all the stuff, the other person in that picture is the older son saying, what, you're even going to give him a ring? And the words from the Bible remind us that the son says, the older brother was angry and refused to join the party. All these years I've worked for you, and all that time you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. The older brother thought he was pleasing the father by being good, by being respectable. And God does want us to live holy lives, as the word the Bible uses, to be like him, to choose to do the things, to live as he would want us to live. That's good. But one of the things this parable is telling us is what the Father wants from us above all else is love. Love. Will we love one another? Will we love freely? Because when we put respectability before love, we become judgmental. We judge one another on whether we're good enough to get to God. And God said first, you might have heard it in a song somewhere else, but God said first, the whole point and emphasis of the Bible is all you need is love. All you need is love. And the following and the obedience comes out of love and not out of a sense of duty. The son's return was great for everybody, apart from the calf. Kill the fatted calf. And we come to Frostad's final painting, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And if you came across this painting without this explanation, you would never think it had anything to do with the prodigal son. As you see the calf in the field grazing with its mother, you see the older son in the green shirt coming towards to get the calf. And right in the far distance, if you look at the cow's nose, you can see the son being welcomed home in the distance by the father. And as they look at this picture, this poor happy calf who's about to be slaughtered, I'm reminded of Jesus, God, who sent his son. He sent his son to give his life. To give his life freely, that we might be accepted and that we might be welcomed home. That our sin, the wrong things that we do, separate us from God. When Jesus died on the cross, he took them on himself. He became our sacrifice. Wonderful, wonderful thing. The grace of God is not free, but there's a price that God willingly pays to accept us home. So we look at this picture and finishing then. Who do you relate to in the picture? Is it the Father? Are you full of love? Do you relate to the Son? Do you feel like a bit of a mess at the moment? Do you feel like life's a struggle? Perhaps you feel like the older brother, that you're realising that you're looking at other people constantly and being really disappointed in them or picking faults in them. Perhaps you relate to the calf. Whoever you relate to, may you know that you are loved by God. May God so overwhelm us with his love that we freely let it flow out and we share it with those around us. And as we think about the love of God as Christians, may we realise that we're also called to love one another. So if you're listening to this on or around Valentine's Day, it's a miserable day for all sorts of people who aren't in relationships. Realise that you have the opportunity to show some friendship and kindness to them. The love that God has given to us, may we share it freely on Valentine's Day as we show respect and value and love for one another, but equally throughout the whole of our lives. Freely we've received God's love. May we receive it and share it freely with those around us. Amen.